Okay, so welcome back. Now, I'm going to do a bunch of examples here. And the reason I'm doing these is because I want to show you some rules, but I'm going to combine some of the rules than what you may have seen. And a lot of this has to do with what we call the distributive property. Okay, and I'm going to explain this as it relates to adding and subtracting when there are parentheses involved. Okay, so let's just go in and I'll explain along the way. So for part A, we have this 1 plus, and then we want to add the quantity of 3x plus y. Now the thing is if there's a plus here, then we don't need the parentheses. The parentheses are extra, okay? So we can just get rid of them, and we're done, okay? So we can simplify it by just getting rid of the parentheses. So whenever there's a plus sign, we don't need the parentheses. For example, here as well, we're adding this entire quantity. Well, adding this entire quantity would be the same as just adding A and then subtracting B. So again, we don't need the parentheses here. So whenever there's addition involved with a group, we're adding a group, an algebraic expression as a group, we can just drop the parentheses, okay? So, what about subtraction though? Subtraction, it's a different story, and I kind of alluded to this in an earlier video. So when we have subtraction, then we can't just drop the parentheses. If we just willy-nilly drop the parentheses, we are going to make a mistake, okay? It will give us the wrong answer. And the reason is because what you want to do is realize that I'm not subtracting just one piece of it. I'm subtracting the entire piece, okay? So here's what you need to do, okay? When you're subtracting the whole thing, you're subtracting each piece, okay? And if you just drop the parentheses without realizing that or without considering that, then what you end up doing is you're really just saying, well, I just want to subtract the first piece, okay? So you got to realize that the parentheses means I'm subtracting everything. With addition, it doesn't matter. If I'm adding the whole thing, I'm adding this piece and I'm adding this piece and nothing changes, whether I add the parentheses or not, okay? And here's why, right? So if I have parentheses here, and if I imagine that there's an imaginary 1 right here, right? Because 1 times this is the same thing, right? So it doesn't matter whether I put the 1 there or not. Well, if I take this and I distribute the 1, right? Because I have to multiply across by 1. What happens? Nothing. Okay? This is the distributive property, right? If I'm multiplying by something outside, like 1, then I have to multiply each term inside the parentheses by that factor, in this case 1. But in this case, because it's a plus, nothing changes. So I can just write 1 plus 3x plus y and I'm good. Same thing here, right? If I have an imaginary 1 here, I'm just going to distribute the 1 to both terms inside the parentheses, and again, nothing happens. 1 times any number is just itself, so it doesn't change anything. So I can just write 2 plus a minus 2b. Now, here, if I put an imaginary 1 there, well, now this is subtraction. So what I'm doing is, here's a better way of looking at it, is if I change this to a plus, negative. So now what I'm doing is basically I'm multiplying by -1. If I change it to a plus, to an addition problem, which is totally fine, I can do that. Well, what does that mean? It's now I'm going to be distributing not 1, but I'm going to be distributing -1 to both of these. So what happens? Well, effectively, it changes the sign of each one. -1 times x gives you a -x. -1 times 2y gives you a -2y. So what do you end up getting? You get 2 plus a -1 times x plus what? -2y. Now, the 1 times x is the same as x, so I get a negative x, right? So I can write this as a negative x, because remember, the 1 is implied, right? 1 times x is still x, so negative x is fine. Now also I could write this as a subtraction too, right? And I can write this one as a subtraction, like that. So what happens? When I have a subtraction here, I can either look at it as multiplying by -1 and using the distributive property, or realize that if I'm subtracting this whole thing, I have to change the sign when I distribute. Okay, so I changed this to a minus. This was a plus, so I changed it to a minus. This is a plus, so I changed it to a minus. So let's think about this. Let's do this again, this one here. So again, I'm going to make this into a plus, a -1. So now I'm going to distribute the -1 to both of them. So what happens? I'm going to get a plus a -2x, right? Minus a negative y. But then what happens? This becomes a subtraction, right? Plus a negative is the same as subtraction. And this one here, if I change this to a plus, this goes to a plus. So it becomes an addition. So what happened? This became a subtraction. This became an addition. So the signs changed, right? So now let's do this one. Okay, now I'm not going to use the -1, but I'm just going to, again, distribute the subtraction. And remember that when I distribute the subtraction, I change the sign. So this means this will become 5 plus 2a minus b. Okay, but realize what's going on in the background. I'm really just multiplying by -1 using the distributive property. Okay. Now, that's where this comes in. Now, if I have something other than 1, now again, this is where the distributive property comes in, right? So let's say I have 2. Well, 2, I have to use the distributive property in order to simplify this. So I have to distribute, that's why it's called the distributive property, is I can distribute multiplication across addition and subtraction. So if I want to simplify this, I need to distribute the 2 to every term in parentheses. So I have to multiply the 2 by the a, and I have to multiply the 2 by the b. So that means this becomes 2a plus 2b. Now, guess what? What if I have a negative value out here? Well, basically now I'm just combining what I've been doing here in C, D, and E, right, with what I'm doing here in F, right? So now I'm just combining the two things. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to distribute the -2 to both of these. So that means I'm going to get -2x, right? Because I'm going to distribute the -2 to this one and distribute the -2 to this one. So I get -2x plus -2y, which then gives me what? -2x minus 2y. And then finally, if I have something like this, I'm going to do the exact same thing. So I'm going to distribute the -5. Now here, it's a subtraction. I'm going to change this to a plus negative. Why? Because I want to make sure I don't make any sign errors. So now I'm going to distribute the -5 to each term. So then this becomes 2 plus -15a. Now minus what? -10b. And then of course, this becomes a subtraction, and this one becomes what? A plus, which becomes addition. And that's how you do it. So again, remember these, practice these rules. Especially, it's basically using the distributive property. Take care.